Hello and welcome to this introductory video for the GOdogs Genetics of Obesity Research Project. I'm Eleanor Raffan and I'm in charge of recruiting samples and leading the research, and I've prepared this video because the success of our project depends entirely on people like you getting involved in sample recruitment, and that recruitment is done in as standardised a way as possible so that we can reasonably compare dogs from different practices. And to that end, I started off trying to visit all of the practices who said they might like to get involved, but we've had such a positive response that it just hasn't been possible. So this video is an alternative way of getting this critical information across. So in the next few minutes, I'll talk briefly about why it's worth studying the genetics of obesity, how we can make the study work by carefully selecting the right dogs to include in the project, and then discuss the practicalities of condition scoring and saliva sampling. But first, I thought I'd show you a quick shot of me to prove I am a real person. I'm a vet with a background in internal medicine and a PhD in genetics, and am genuinely and geekily interested in how this four-letter code of DNA can influence such amazingly complex outcomes as body weight. I'm based at the University in Cambridge, with collaborations at the vet schools here and in Liverpool too. So most vet professionals don't need much convincing that obesity is a significant clinical problem in dogs. About a third of UK dogs are overweight. That means that over 2.5 million dogs in this country are overweight. Being overweight can cause or worsen orthopaedic disease like arthritis, respiratory diseases such as laryngeal paralysis, and obesity is also associated with increased rates of cancer and diabetes. But perhaps the most compelling reason to worry about obesity is that it actually leads to dogs dying younger. In studies comparing dogs fed ad lib throughout their lives and others kept lean on a restricted diet, obese Labradors died 2 years earlier than their lean counterparts. So that obesity causes clinical problems is clear, but what some people find less clear is why I should be focusing on the genetics of body weight when we know full well what causes dogs to become overweight. Too much food and not enough exercise. And that's absolutely true, but if it were just that straightforward, why do we see high rates of obesity in some breeds of dogs and not in others? And you'll find it difficult to convince me that Labrador owners are so much more indulgent and exercise averse than Yorkie owners that Labradors are the headliners on the obesity chart and Yorkies don't even feature. And where we see strong breed predispositions like that, genetics are strongly implicated as being behind it. And there's lots more evidence that genes are important from humans. In us, between 40 and 70% of our tendency to gain weight is due to our genes. There's been a lot of research done in how genes can influence weight, and as a result, we know that the regulation of body weight is a lot more complicated than being solely down to our willpower and the function of the cortex, the sort of everyday thinking parts of the brain. And that makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because since when does the body leave complex homeostatic mechanisms like the regulation of energy balance to the thinking parts of our brain? Instead, there are complex mechanisms whereby short-term signals are sent from the GI tract about there having been a recent meal, or long-term signals are sent from fat to say that energy lipid stores are approaching full. And those are fed back to the ancient parts of the brain in the hypothalamus, where the fundamental regulation of appetite and satiety and energy storage are all regulated. So there is a good reason to think this study can uncover some fascinating biology about the genetics of obesity, but I do appreciate that only really appeals to geeks like me. So I want to point out why there's a very real prospect of clinical benefits coming from the project too. And I think if we can talk to the owners of a slim, attractive puppy like this little guy and say, you're up against it in this breed, we know there is a real genetic reason for them being so food motivated that they tend to put on weight, but you can keep on top of it with good management. I think it'll give them the reassurance and motivation to prevent their dogs turning into the kind of decrepit, overweight guys that we all worry about. Or, if the battle's already been lost, we can remove some of the stigma that goes with owning an obese dog and explain to the owners that there is indeed a genetic reason the dog has the giant appetite it has, but that the biology is such that it can lose weight with persistence and some creative thinking about how to keep the dog happy in other ways. It is worth mentioning what we won't achieve with the study. We don't want to develop a single genetic test for obesity and to try and breed it out of certain lines. That kind of genetic manipulation can cause far more problems than it can solve. We might identify a drug target, but we know how to get dogs to lose weight, and I'm certainly not motivated to do this study in order to find a new wonder drug to substitute for giving a dog a healthy lifestyle. So that's the end of the big sell for the project. Next I'm going to explain a little bit of how the genetic study will work and how that influences the dogs we're keen to recruit for the first wave of the genetic studies. So the plan is to study Labrador and Golden Retrievers, and the reason from that is that they both originated from a single breed back in the 1800s, these rather handsome black dogs, they're St John's water dogs. And they belonged to fishermen and used to leap into the icy waters of northern Canada to retrieve the nets and swim back with them to the boats. And you can put together a very plausible hypothesis that doing that kind of work, it made a lot of sense to keep a layer of fat under your skin and to snaffle every scrap of food that was on offer. But if as such they involved a genetic tendency to gain weight, and that was passed on to their modern descendants who now live much cushier lives, it could well be a common root of the obesity problem in both labs and golden retrievers. In practical terms, I'm going to be performing what's known as a genome-wide mapping study for obesity in each breed. And that makes use of the fact that we know the sequence of the 3 billion odd base pairs of the canine genome, and also the position of hundreds of thousands of markers along it, and we can test to look for patterns of markers that occur commonly in obese dogs but rarely in lean dogs, just as the red pattern does in the diagram. And once we found the patterns, we look at the genes in that region and know that they're the likely source of the problem. And the sharp-eyed amongst you will have noticed that therein lies the big potential barrier to the success of this project, in that it will only work if all the dogs in the lean group are genetically predisposed to being lean, and all the dogs in the obese group are genetically predisposed to being obese. And we know that in our patients there is far more than just genes which influence body weight, and particularly our dogs' owners. So I'm hoping to find a particular subset of dogs for the initial study, and that's where this project is so reliant on your knowledge and expertise as vets and nurses who really know your clients and their dogs, because I hope you can help me find them. In the next part of the talk, I'll get down to the nitty-gritty of what's involved in sample recruitment. I've put together what I hope is a very user-friendly set of paperwork to go in each pack that's sent to practices. In it there are summaries for quick reference that cover everything I'll say in detail here, so there shouldn't be any need to take notes or anything now. The first bit of paper to know about is this eligibility checklist. I've put 2 copies in the packs because I thought it might be helpful to have one with the sampling kits and the other perhaps behind reception, in case owners ask those of you at the front line about the study and you need a quick reference. So at the moment, I'm most keen to recruit fairly extreme examples of obese, greedy dogs and lean, non-greedy dogs. And the next few slides talk about which dogs are the ones I'd be really grateful if you could go forth and actively recruit to the study. First, the obese group. I'll talk specifically about condition scoring in a few minutes, so for now all I'll say is that the obese dogs need to be really very portly, with body condition scores between 7 and 9 out of 9. Really, most obese dogs will be safe bets for entry to the study, but it is important to think about medical reasons why a dog might be predisposed to obesity that could overpower an underlying lean genetic makeup. And the big ones to think about there are hypothyroidism, other hormonal reasons like Cushing's that could give a dog a barrel-like shape without making it really obese, or dogs who are on steroids or anti-epileptic drugs or anything else that might act to artificially increase their appetite. Moving on, there's a bit more to think about with the lean dogs. Here, I'm after the truly lean, healthy weight dogs with condition scores of 4 to 5 out of 5. Importantly, the dogs I'm really interested in are a rare subset of lean retrievers who just seem to keep themselves that way. Most people laugh when I say that, but I've been looking for these guys and they really do exist. It's true that the majority of lean retrievers I've come across aren't magically or genetically self-regulating at that weight, but instead are kept that way by owners who either give them bucket loads of exercise or have the strength of will to resist that big brown eye treatment and keep their dogs on slim rations. And the owners of those dogs tend to say things like, there's a fat dog fighting to get out, or they let slip that although they perceive they don't make much of an effort to keep the dog slim, it does have every meal weighed and never ever gets tidbits. Or they do agility 5 times a week, or they work outside all day. And I think about 13 out of 15 slim Labradors I've come across fall into that category. Of those 15 slim Labradors, another one tends to turn out to have either a documented, diagnosed or suspected medical reason for being lean. Sometimes that manifests as recent weight loss and the dog is perhaps actively sick, but much more commonly it's that a dog has a history of chronic grumbly gut disease in the past, which the owner now has under control, perhaps just with dietary management, or they say that the dog has a sensitive stomach, or perhaps goes off its food for a few days often every now and then. My suspicion is that a lot of these dogs have a low-grade IBD or pancreatitis, which doesn't need veterinary attention, but it might be a very good reason for them to avoid guzzling masses of food, despite them having a greedy genotype. So as a result, the dogs I'm really keen to seek out are the remaining kind of 1 in 15 lean Labradors who just seem to regulate their own weight. And these are rare Labradors and a few more retrievers who perhaps will graze through the day rather than just hoovering up their food in one go, or who eat up promptly but don't tend to scrounge or scavenge that much at other times. And this is, of course, a grey zone, and distinguishing them from the other groups can be tough, particularly since some of these low appetite dogs will also do agility or get plenty of exercise. So it would be great if you can seek them out, but please do be inclusive. If you're not sure, give the dogs the benefit of the doubt, take the sample, let me know your concerns on the form, and and I can make the final call when I speak to the owners. And certainly if you're approached by a keen owner, it's probably best not to turn them away, even if you can tell you've got a really greedy dog, simply because that might put them off telling their friends and relations about the study and lose me samples in the long run. So up until now I've been keen to tell you about the motivation and the essentials of dog recruitment, but the next few minutes are about the bits of the study where I am entirely dependent on you as vet professionals getting things right, so the condition scoring and the sample collection. The condition scoring is a potential weak point to this work because although this condition scoring chart is very well validated, it only works if people really pay attention to the descriptors and follow them closely. And in order to do that properly, it's really important to do a thorough kind of laying on of hands like Rachel's doing here. It's really not too much of a problem to spot the overweight group. In order to be a 7 out of 9, dogs' ribs are really quite tricky to feel because they're buried in fat. They've almost completely lost their waist from both above and the side, and they have fat pads palpable above their shoulder blades and at the tail base. So any dog that fits that criteria or is even bigger is ideal, and if they're known to be super greedy too, that's even better. At the lean end of the spectrum, condition scoring isn't always as easy, particularly I think in the Labradors, because we are so used to seeing them overweight that sometimes we have a slightly skewed perception of what constitutes thin for a Labrador. So in order to be a 4 or 5 out of 9, dogs really do need to have ribs that are easily palpated, possibly seen. They should have lovely neat waists from above and the side, and no hint of fat pads on their top line. So Purdy's a good example of an older dog with condition score 5, while Billy here is a very big framed dog who actually weighed in at over 35 kilos but has a great waist and easily palpable ribs. He's the same condition score as Brooke here, who is 10 kilos lighter but still a 5, as is this really nice golden retriever. Labradors who are 4s often are the ones whose owners get accosted in the park and told their dogs are too thin, and that's what's happened to Archie's owner. Here you can see his ribs even on the video, but he's very well muscled and generally a very athletic, healthy, lean body shape. So this slide summarises the body shape inclusion criteria. The only new information on here is that the lean dogs should be at least 5 to make sure they've reached their mature body weight. And the obese dogs can be any age. The next thing to show you is the saliva sampling kits. They come with full instructions on each kit, and I've printed out separately unlaminated ones in the packs. They look like this. There's a tube with a special DNA-friendly buffer in it, and 2 spongy swabs that are designed to absorb saliva and scoop up good dribbles of it. In order to take the samples, you use both swabs as a pair for maximum absorbency, and I found it most successful to tuck them in low in the cheek pouch and leave them there for about 15 seconds on one side, scoop out as much slobber as you can, and then go to the other side, letting them absorb as much saliva as possible. The dogs seem to mind less if you let their cheeks go rather than holding them back, like they show in the picture, and rather just hold their muzzle closed around the swabs. The things that can go wrong with sampling are that I get your DNA, so please wear gloves, that I get lots of bacterial DNA, so try to avoid the teeth, but don't worry too much. I could get very dilute DNA, so the dogs should have nothing to drink for 10 minutes before sampling. And I don't want food DNA, so no food for 30 minutes before sampling. Once you've got the sample, it's fine at room temperature for a year, so just shake it like mad to mix it with the buffer to begin with, then store it upright until you return the samples to me by post. And I'll put stamped addressed envelopes in with the kits that go out to practices so that that's a straightforward process. If you think you'll get a few samples, keep them until you can send a batch, but if not, just post them with their accompanying paperwork one at a time. So that accompanying paperwork is shown here. Most is for the owners. First, this survey and a consent form as well. As ever, it's important to take informed consent, so make sure the owners have seen the information leaflet and be prepared to answer any questions. The only part of the consent form I can see causing any problems is the opt-out clause for the DNA possibly being used to investigate diseases other than obesity in future. I'm not planning to do that at the moment, but I'd be a lunatic to collect a load of retriever DNA and not leave the option of looking at common diseases like hip dysplasia. So that's what that's about. Finally, there's a checklist for you as the vet nurse or vet to fill out when you collect the sample. It reminds you of the eligibility criteria, provides a space to record any problems with sampling, and reminds you to include the owner survey, the consent form, and a copy of the dog's history if the owner agrees. On the back is where you write the dog's condition score and weight, and I'd be really grateful if you could just include some brief comments on why you think the dog is lean or obese. So whether it's due to owner factors like diet or exercise, or dog factors which might be genetic. And there's also a reminder to consider, and if you have time, specifically ask a history that would throw light on any medical reasons for their body shape. And if you're at all concerned about a possible confounding illness like hypothyroidism or gut disease or whatever, just let me know. Again, collect the sample, but I can follow it up later. So I think that's my lot. Thank you for your patience getting to this point of the video. It remains for me to say that I am enormously grateful for the help of people like you in helping with sample recruitment. Without it, this project would be a non-starter. In my experience so far, people often have a lot of good ideas about suitable dogs when they first think about the project and the kind of things I've talked about in the last few minutes. They know about that lovely lean dog that came in for a vaccine last month, or the one that used to come to the obesity clinics before the owners gave up. But actually translating that into actual samples is the tricky bit. So if I can, I'd like to make a plea that if you can think of those dogs, please consider approaching their owners now to invite them to participate. I've found that most owners are either flattered to have been noticed as having a lean dog, or really relieved to be given an excuse why their dog might be so overweight. And either way, they usually respond really well and are keen to help, and it would be great if those samples could arrive over the next few weeks rather than waiting for them for months and months. I've got a whole load of kind of promotional leaflets and posters, and it would be great if you could spread them far and wide. And if you have practice Facebook pages or Twitter feeds, perhaps you can send out links to the GOdogs website and promote the fact that you're involved in the research, which, as I say, is quite a nice, warm two-way response between owners and practices in my experience so far. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch by email or phone or via the website. I think there is enormous clinical and scientific value in this project, and I hope you'll find it rewarding to be part of it. Thanks again for watching the video, and goodbye for now.